A Heroine's Beginning, Chapter 22. The day of Ella and Christopher's wedding dawned warm and bright. I was awoken by a servant early in the morning. A bath was drawn for me, and a maid ushered me into it as soon as I rolled out of bed. She told me that I needed to be ready as soon as possible. There were bubbles resting on top of the hot water, and I spent far too long playing with them and being childish. The maid returned and started to wash my hair for me, and scolded me slightly for getting water and soapy bubbles everywhere. I was too excited for the day to care much. My hair was washed quite vigorously by the maid, and then I was out of the lovely warm bath and dressed in a dressing gown, while my hair was being dried with towels. Once the maid was completely certain that there was no water residue left in my hair, she brushed it and began to style it. It was pulled back into a low, loose bun, with a few strands left out to frame my face. A small golden ringlet that I had never seen before was placed on the dressing table. It was light and intricate. There were little flowers and leaves made out of gold that were woven into the design. It was so beautiful. The maid lifted it onto my head and secured it with some hairpins. She then picked up a small hand mirror to let me look at myself. I was taken aback for a minute. I looked so different, and I liked it. I thanked the maid as she pushed me out of my room and toward Ella's room. My dress was hung up in there, along with Jacqueline's, so I moved as fast as I could to her room, very aware that I was still only dressed in my dressing gown, and did not want to run into anyone in that state of undress. In Ella's room, another maid was busy styling Ella's hair. Jacqueline was yet to arrive, so I sat on the sofa and waited. Ella was told she was not allowed to move her head, so we tried to talk, but it proved surprisingly difficult. So to make proper use of the limited time we had, I was asked to sit in a chair near a table where a maid had opened a small box. Inside were cosmetics. I had never worn cosmetics before. We had never been able to afford any. It was definitely a unique experience, having rouge applied to my cheeks, powder placed on my eyelids, and color put on my lips. When she was finished, I grabbed the mirror to see. For the second time that day, I was taken aback by my own reflection. I actually looked pretty, verging on beautiful. I was truly shocked that I could look like this. "Marion, you look amazing." I turned to look at Ella, who had just finished having her hair and cosmetics applied. She looked truly stunning. She also had a golden circlet resting on her head, but hers was larger than mine, and had colored jewels set into it. "You should see yourself," I joked. Jacqueline then arrived, with her hair styled the same way as mine. She was also subjected to the same treatment as me with the cosmetics, although she did not look very happy with it. When we were all done, the seamstress entered the room with Ella's wedding dress, stitched to perfection. The palace housekeeper also entered the room with the seamstress. She was a very efficient woman, called Prudence Harris. From what I had heard around the palace, she was very strict, a stickler for detail, and fiercely loyal to the Duke and Christopher. I had heard Ella speak of her with great admiration, and I think some affection. Trust Ella to be the person who gets the strictest housekeeper on the planet to like her. Prudence told us to hurry up and get changed. There was not long before the ceremony, only about 2 hours. To me that seemed like plenty of time, but to Prudence it meant we were already behind schedule. Jacqueline and myself were pushed behind 2 separate changing screens and given our dresses to change into. I stepped out of the dressing robe I was wearing and tried to get the dress on as quickly as I could. Goosebumps were already starting to form on my arm due to lack of clothing. I pulled the dress up as carefully as I could and tried to tighten the laces at the back as far as I was able. But as with most fashionable dresses, it was impossible to do by yourself. Whoever originally designed back lace dresses clearly hated the thought of women independently dressing themselves, so I guess it was a man. Also, whoever decided women's waists should be squeezed into the smallest shape possible by corsets also clearly did not have to wear them. I almost preferred my normal working day dress. Yes, it was cut to show off my figure, but it did not lock me into a shape like some caged animal. I stepped out from behind the screen, and the maid helped me pull the rest of the laces tighter and secure them. The one good thing about this dress was that my back was perfectly straight as long as I wore it. I did not even have to think about it. The thing that took the most time was assembling Ella's dress. The layers of fabric and the overskirts and underskirts took a long time to figure out which piece was going where. And with the help of myself, Jacqueline, Prudence, the seamstress, and a maid, we eventually managed to dress Ella. With her face made up, her hair perfectly styled with a small crown nestled in her golden curls, the sight of her in her dress with her beaming smile did make her look utterly breathtaking. Something told me it would be a sight to see when Christopher looked at her for the first time that day. And not only was she stunning, she also looked stunningly happy, as if all of her dreams were coming true, and she could not wait to be Christopher's wife. I did feel generally thrilled on her behalf. She did not have to wait very long. The start of the ceremony had arrived faster than I anticipated. We had passed the 2 hours very quickly with our talking. Before I knew it, Jacqueline and myself were stood outside of the door of the church, that looked more like a cathedral. We each held a small bouquet of flowers in our hands, matching the colors on our dresses, and we were stood behind 2 small girls, who I had been told were Christopher's cousins, or his cousins' children. I could not quite remember. They were to be the flower girls, and had small baskets of loose flowers grasped tightly. They told me their names were Charlotte and Elizabeth, but they preferred Lizzie and Lottie. They seemed very confident for a 5- and 7-year-old. They seemed to adore Ella. I think they thought she was a princess out of a storybook, the way they looked at her. Ella told them lovingly that they were to walk down the aisle, dropping the flowers as they went, smiling all the way down, and to go sit next to their parents when they were at the end. They nodded and took up their places at the front of the line. I was to follow the girls once they got to the end, with Jacqueline behind me. As a highborn and member of Ella's family, she took precedent over me. I truly did not mind, though. I had grown to like Jacqueline through everything. She was more bold and confident now, joking with Ella and me, making conversation, and actually making fun of her sister and mother. She appeared to really care for Ella, and had apologized profusely for the way she was treated in her own home. I really did like her. Prudence informed us it was time, and the door opened a little. Lizzie and Lottie walked through, beaming as they did. I knew I only had about a minute before it was my turn to follow them, so I turned quickly to Ella. "I know you don't need it, but good luck," I said. "Thank you, Marion. We all love you, you know that. I do, Christopher does. And I do as well," Jacqueline added. "And your parents do too. Wherever they are, they're watching right now, and love you more than anything." "I love you too," she told us, and opened her arms for a quick embrace, taking Jacqueline in one arm and me in the other. "Last embrace as an unmarried maiden," I joked, and she laughed. "Good. I don't want to be unmarried anymore." "Oh, I shall have to find you a groom then," I teased. "I wonder if Lord Christopher would be willing to marry you." "I have to hope so," Ella said. "But I hear he's getting married today." "Shame. I thought you two would be perfect for each other, and you would be very happy together." Our conversation was cut short by Prudence frantically trying to put us back into position as we were about to go. I turned my head back to her and mouthed, "Good luck." She nodded in response, and then the doors were opened, and I turned back to face the front and began to walk slowly down the aisle. The church was completely packed full. I didn't recognize many people. I guessed a lot of them were society's elite, who were only here because it was the social event of the year, instead of actually celebrating the union of Ella and Christopher. I tried to keep my pace steady and my head held up high, completely aware of the hundreds of pairs of eyes currently on me. I passed unnamed face after unnamed face, making my way down. About halfway down the aisle, I spotted my entire family sat in a pew, all wearing the new clothes I had altered the previous day, and they so far hadn't torn their clothes or covered them in mud or food. I caught the eye of my father, who gave me a proud smile, and a nod as if to say, "Focus on the task ahead, not us." I kept the same smile plastered to my face, and kept walking. As the front of the church came into view, I could see Christopher stood at the front of the altar, looking back down the aisle. He appeared to be looking at me and Jacqueline, but I was sure he was not the least bit interested in us. He was waiting for Ella. I eventually made it up to the steps just before the altar and climbed them, thankful that I had not tripped or made a fool of myself. I took my position off to the side of the altar, opposite from where Christopher stood with his groomsmen. Jacqueline stood slightly in front of me, just like we had rehearsed the day before. I noticed one of the groomsmen was staring directly at me, and I slowly moved my neck to see who it was. I was met with a smug smile on a familiar face, with green eyes staring at me. I gave him an equally smug smile back. Just then, the music on the organ started up again, and the doors opened to reveal Ella. I could not help myself. I beamed as I saw her. My eyes flitted off to the side to see Christopher's reaction. His face displayed pure awe. He looked completely entranced by her. His chest stopped moving for a moment, and his mouth fell slightly agape. Once she moved closer, he seemed to snap out of his daze, and possibly the largest smile I had ever seen spread across his face. I do not think I had ever seen anyone so purely happy. Ella made it up the steps to the altar, her smile not faltering once as Christopher took her hand, and they did not take their eyes off each other. The priest cleared his throat, and that seemed to drag them back to reality, and Ella blushed and handed her bouquet of flowers to Jacqueline. The priest began the ceremony, but in truth, I did not pay much attention to it. I was caught up in watching the two of them. They had not let go of each other's hand, and I could see Christopher rubbing it gently, as though he was soothing her, and Ella seemed to be gripping him tightly, so they could not be parted from each other. My entire life, I had read stories. A lot of those stories told of epic and true loves, the type that would endure no matter what, the kind where two people would travel across continents just to be with each other, the type of love that would make them need each other just to continue breathing, continue existing. Desperate, passionate, deep, splendid. I had read about it often. I had always thought this type of love was confined to the pages of fiction, to folk stories and romantic tales. But as I looked at Ella and Christopher, I knew instantly that kind of love did exist in real life, and I was staring at two people who had found it in each other. They exchanged their vows of love and fidelity, and I knew they would not have any trouble keeping them. To be honest, the service passed in a bit of a blur, and it was over fairly quickly. It was when the priest announced that Christopher may kiss his bride that I started to pay attention to what was happening again. I had never actually seen the two of them kiss before, but the happiness they felt and the love they had for each other came across in a big way. With large smiles, they turned to face the congregation. They were applauded as they started to make their way back down the aisle as husband and wife. We were meant to follow directly after them. Throughout the ceremony, James was stood behind Christopher, mirroring where Jacqueline was stood. There was another man stood behind him, opposite where I was stood. I recognized him from the ball. I think his name was Philip. We were told when we practiced in Ella's room last night that the groomsmen would escort us back down the aisle, so I presumed we would be paired up with the man opposite us. James, however, clearly had another idea. He practically grabbed Philip and pushed him in front of him, whispering something in his ear. Philip looked a little confused, but started to walk towards Jacqueline, offering his arm. I knew exactly what he had done, and I was about to scold him for it. But James raised his eyebrow and gestured with his eyes toward the hundreds of people still in the congregation, who would be looking at us any second, as Ella and Christopher were almost at the door. So I reluctantly took James's arm, not without a quick pinch to his forearm as punishment. Why couldn't he simply just follow the procession like everyone else? We walked in silence, still smiling at the gathered people. I even dared to give my family a small wave. James turned his head just at that moment and saw Tom, Robbie, and Gwyn give me a large wave in return, along with the rest of them giving me acknowledgement. We continued walking in silence until we finally got to the door and could relax slightly. Our pace increased as we had to catch up with the rest of the wedding party, which were heading to the carriages, waiting to take us back to the palace. I tried to retract my arm from James so it would be easier to move quickly, but he kept firm hold on me. "Why did you do that? In front of everyone?" I asked. "Why not?" he responded. "Could you not just follow the order we were placed in? It was very simple." "I am sure it was. But I wanted to walk down the aisle with you, Marion. Not her, whatever her name is." "Jacqueline. Her name is Jacqueline. Surely you must have been told that." "I probably was. But she's not going to be my sister-in-law, unlike Christopher, so I didn't listen." "So you would only pay attention to someone's name if they were going to be related to you in some way?" I teased. "Yes, of course, Marion. Why bother learning anyone else's name?" He teased right back. I noticed the particular emphasis on the word Marion,